the vulnerabilities that, the threats that business face from cybercrime in the world of cybersecurity. So I've been the Director of Europol for quite some time now, and over the period that I've been in charge in helping national agencies fight organised crime and terrorism right across Europe, of course we've seen how technology-enabled crime has come to the fore and has become a major dominant part, in fact the primary facilitator of crime and terrorism today, not only in terms of how cybercrime directly impacts businesses around the world, but how it enables, in an increasing fashion, the world of terrorism. We see the ugly propaganda from ISIS, of course, and the way in which it enables, through the darknet, an enormous trade in illicit goods and services in the drugs world, firearms, and in many other areas as well. So we're looking at a criminal picture, a security landscape across Europe that very much has brought crime and security into the age of technology. And I just want to, over the next 15 minutes, explore with you some of the dimensions of that and how it impacts in particular on business. Now this conference comes at a time of some important strategic developments in the response to cybercrime. The establishment here in the UK, of course, of the new National Cybersecurity Centre, and its excellent report jointly produced with the National Crime Agency, which was published in the last few days, which talks about the cyber threat to UK business. A very, very good report. Won't take you too long to read it if you haven't done already, and captures very well, I think, the state of the threat and how the UK community, business community, should respond to that. Now, I don't work for either the National Crime Agency or the NCSE, so there's me giving it a free plug because it really is very good. It talks about the rising scale and impact, of course, of cyber crime, cyber-enabled crime, and has an interesting review of what it described as some watershed moments, cybersecurity moments in 2016, which I'm sure, as experts you all are, you will be familiar with. The Mirai bot case, where up to 1 million Internet of Things devices, of course, were captured effectively in a DDoS attack. The attack on the Ukraine electricity grid, the so-called black energy malware attack by a foreign actor, the first of its kind really, successfully attacking the critical national infrastructure of a state. So these, amongst others, including the huge Yahoo data breach, further in the news yesterday as a result of FBI indictments of certain Russian actors. These show the evolving nature and certainly the scale of how cybercrime is growing. The growing interconnection between cyber criminal actors and state-sponsored, so that's forcing up the level of technological capability in the cybercrime field, driving up levels of innovation as well, and just how big time this is getting now in terms of the threat to businesses. Now, at around the same time, Europol have been doing its work in this area. In fact, we established the European Cybercrime Centre 2013, and it plays a pivotal role, I think, in supporting just about every major cyber criminal investigation across Europe, over 200 major investigations that it ran last year, for example. And from that and the other work that we've been doing, and from the ability that Europol has to work across 750 interconnected law enforcement agencies around Europe and beyond, we're capturing a lot of data every day about crime and terrorism, applying the power of data analytics to that from our headquarters so that we can really identify intelligence connections between member states and help the national agencies therefore respond to what is clearly an evolving globalized security threat that we have. But from that data as well, we're capturing huge strategic understanding about how crime is developing, and we have condensed that in our flagship strategic report, the so-called EU Serious Organised Crime Threat Assessment, which was also produced within the last week, and is the definitive assessment that EU ministers will use to make their decisions about what the strategic priorities for the next 4 years will be. And as you might understand and might expect, cybercrime features very heavily in that. And also the online trade, which, as I said earlier, is facilitating other forms of threat as well. Now, the findings in our report are consistent with those that the National Cybersecurity Centre, the National Crime Agency, have been talking about. Some aspects of that, how ransomware, of course, has come to the fore really in the last couple of years. It's now a $1 billion cybercrime industry, threatening until now largely small and medium-sized businesses, increasingly healthcare trusts, especially in the United States as well. We're concerned about the evolving technological capability of ransomware and the potential, at least, for it to get through the cybersecurity defenses of some large corporations in the future. That might be something to look out for. And it makes the point about how this certainly is a corporate suite level issue now, because behind something like ransomware are some very important policy issues that boardrooms have to grapple with. And if it's a very large corporation, it becomes a public policy issue as well. You know, the CEO of a large company will have to decide, and if they haven't prepared in time, he'll have to decide on the spot whether or not to pay that ransom. And if he doesn't pay that ransom, then his files are locked down, and every 24 hours the systems are locked down. There's an operating loss in the millions, perhaps. But if he does pay it, he's got to know that he's dealing with a bunch of crooks. And how does he know that they'll do what they promise to do? And how does he not know they'll just encourage them to come back for more? And in some jurisdictions in the world, he might even be breaking the law in paying that ransom. So a very good illustration of important policy issues, top-level corporate policy issues that cybercrime is now confronting corporations with as well. In the banking world, very much in the crossfire of the evolving nature from cybercrime, of course. The capability of some of the banking Trojans are growing every day. We're concerned about the evolution of something called fileless malware, which gets beyond the traditional AV defenses and can write the code directly into the memory of systems, which is much harder to detect. In terms of the attacks on ATMs, which have gone in pretty quick time from the period in which gangs were attaching ugly-looking black boxes to the machines themselves to capture devices, capture to read the cards that were being used, now to a point where through malware attacks on the devices themselves, now remote attacks on the bank transfer payment and ATM systems itself. So an evolution there as well. In terms of mobile malware, not yet a major concern for digital banking, but getting there, I think, in terms of how the technology is evolving. The DDoS attacks that I talked about, the Mirai bot effectively powered up something that was 6 times the size in power and energy of a DDoS attack just a year before that. So, you know, very rapid fire developments here, which are keeping us all on our toes, of course. Out of all of this, there are 2 other very important strategic trends, I think, that we have to take note of. The case of the Internet of Things, Mirai bot, in particular shows, I think, a lack of security by design in the development of IT technology in the tech sector. There's, of course, a commercial imperative to be the first to market, and that overrides any sense of developing something in a more responsible security way. So you have these devices that were shipped out around the world, very, very poor security controls in there. In the end, fairly easily overwritten by the cyber criminals. It shows something about how we've still got some way to go, that in the technology sector especially, security really has to be something that is built into the design R&D phase right from the very start as well, and not an afterthought at all. I think that's a very important point. Recognizing that some industry experts have pointed out that by 2020 the world will probably have some 21 billion of these smart devices, interconnected devices, are clearly a huge vulnerability if we don't change the security paradigm in the development of these. Secondly, what lies behind what I've been hinting at so far is the dynamic evolution of the criminal groups themselves. We closed our biggest case to date, actually, at the end of last year, called Operation Avalanche, in which we effectively identified the largest cyber criminal syndicate yet found, I think, by any law enforcement agency in the world. Effectively a conglomeration of 20 cybercrime groups that were operating, pooling their different forms of expertise and specialisms and providing that through a platform economy effectively, feeding the much wider criminal market, producing 1 million phishing emails a week, for example, the latest in banking Trojan capability. Their work effectively found victims, we found victims attributed to their work in 189 different countries. And a 4-year investigation, which is how long it took to get beyond the state-of-the-art security defenses that they were employing online, for example, through our digital forensic work at Europol, led by the FBI and the German prosecutors and 30 other jurisdictions that we brought into this. Finally, we could wrap this up. What the case showed, I think, was, first of all, that this is an illustration of cybercrime going global, certainly, going corporate as well. Effectively, this conglomeration was led by some people that we could easily identify effectively as the CEO, as the CFO, as the CTO. These are the people in the end that together we were able to arrest as well. But it also illustrated the extent to which we're dealing now with this emergence of a platform economy in the criminal market. Crime as a service, if you like, something that is much flatter, more flexible in nature. That's lowering the bar to entry of other criminal groups because you can simply rent out the specialist cybercrime tool that you want from a very enterprising, large-scale criminal market operating essentially on the dark net as well. It's also driving up levels of innovation because there are so many of these specialists that are operating in that environment right now. Now, all of this means, first of all, for business, I think we have to accept that the threat is, of course, increasing in scale and capability. Secondly, the digital footprint, of course, of businesses is also increasing at the same time, particularly as we move into a more cloud-based infrastructure. So that means our vulnerabilities in business world are potentially going up if we don't fix it as well. And in the classic definition in the security world, if you've got a rising threat and a rising vulnerability in the equation, that means that your risk is rising as well. So this becomes a major risk issue, which of course most parts of the business community, certainly at the top end, have recognized. This is clearly a huge risk issue, and behind that, therefore, one has to have a very mature, flexible risk management framework that's been put in place. That's not to say it's the same as just any other risk, like in financial crime, for example, where there are huge, as you know, tough regulatory standards. There's a compliance-led regime that ensures a certain development in response. But this isn't really or only a compliance issue, of course. You know, if you fail to comply with anti-money laundering regulations, you might be hit with a multi-billion-dollar fine in 4 years' time. If you fail to get this right, you know, you're going to crash your business in a day. So that there's a difference. So there's an immediacy to the threat, which has to be tackled in a different way. In the end, though, it is about a risk management framework. It is about getting many things right in terms of your digital hygiene, for example. It's also, though, about making sure your response is proportionate to what the business strategy is. You have to accept a certain level of risk. And in this environment, where there are a lot of vendors, especially, you know, the talk in the community leads effectively to a sort of a hyperinflation of the threat. I'm not saying the threat isn't there, of course it is, but sometimes I think we fail to keep our feet on the ground as well. It's not always an Armageddon scenario. I think we have to make sure that we have a balanced understanding of how to deal with this. One important factor that I think will shine a greater light on the scale of the threat here, of course, is new EU legislation on GDPR, which I'm sure you'll address today. And that clearly is going to force companies to report more breaches. It will shine a light, therefore, on the true nature of the problem here, perhaps, in a way that it's already done in the United States, and when the way domestic legislation in the Netherlands has had a very, very similar impact. I think this is going to be quite an important development in our field when that kicks in from next year onwards. So we're left with thinking, therefore, about making sure we get the basics right in business, of course. Getting those basics spot on is important because still, by far, the majority of the cybercrime cases that we see come from poor digital hygiene. Dridex, which is still a major banking Trojan, effectively is a recycling of an old tool that exploits the failures of business to properly patch manage effectively. And so most of the attacks, therefore, are exploiting those gaps in our poor digital hygiene management, or of course exploiting low user awareness, particularly through social engineering attacks. We've got to get the security by design concept right, not only in the tech sector, but also in our corporations, to make sure that as we're all going through our huge IT digital transformation programs, again, that we're listening to the information security specialists. We're making sure that as we develop the state-of-the-art cloud-based technology, for example, in the banking or other sectors, nonetheless, we can do it, of course, in a secure way according to the risk management framework that we've adopted as well. So is the security voice in all of that sufficiently loud and clear? Is he or she being listened to? In the end, though, this should not be seen primarily as a technology issue. Technology is the vector, is the means by which, of course, the attacks are launched on businesses and is a key part in the way that we should respond to it. But at the other end of the attack chain is not a machine, actually. It's a criminal mind. And I think we've got to understand the sort of motivations and behaviors of criminals, how they operate, as a key part to how we respond to this. We also have to understand the motivations and behaviors of our own staff, not that they're criminal, but that they are of course, a major part of making sure that we can shore up our defenses. And that goes to the very top as well. I talked to you about how ransomware effectively brings the issue of cybersecurity right into the boardroom. Social engineering and the evolution of spear phishing especially does the same, and the development of a key threat, particularly in other parts of Europe over the last 2 years, called CEO fraud, the deliberate mimicking of a CEO or a CFO's account, for example, to try and divert payments in the transfer payment systems, for example. Very sophisticated means that are doing that. Some CEOs themselves are being absolutely duped into doing that as well. Again, personalizing this issue of cybersecurity directly towards the very top end of some of our business. My last point is one about information sharing, which everyone talks about and is absolutely critical. And I run an organization that depends on our ability to leverage, as I said, a very large interconnected law enforcement, increasingly industry community as well, in the sharing of information. I can see how the power of data and technology can drive a more effective response. We need to do that much more, of course, with industry. Industry themselves within their sectors need to be doing more of it as well. But also inside the businesses as well. What we see in the criminal world is this threat convergence. The threat actors are becoming more or less the same, or employing the same techniques between fraud, between financial crime and cyber as well. And yet in most industries, we still have those different regimes absolutely separated. And I think there's a lot that a large corporation can learn, even from looking inside its own information systems, to make sure that the interconnections between criminal actors are identified. So that's a quick run around how I see the threat from cybersecurity, how it's evolving, what the particular vulnerabilities are today towards businesses. I think you have a great agenda today which will explore some of these issues and many others in more detail. But I was very happy to kick off the conference today. Thank you.
Rob, thank you very much.